Thank you all for coming today. It's really a great opportunity to talk about this work, Donate Yourself. I was actually talking about yesterday at another conference called Death and Culture. So this is a different mindset entirely, so I'll try and take you through it as best I can. Ghislaine and Tade are part of Body Data Space, and Body Data Space has a collaborator on this project, so not only Ghislaine and Tade, but also other members of Body Data Space. And we were commissioned by the Human Cell Atlas, which is this very large-scale 2,000 researchers in 75 countries scientific project aiming to map every cell in the human body and build this human cell atlas that I'll talk a little bit more about later. So, the project is all about exploring how people feel and trust in tissue donation for scientific research. But in order to think about tissue donation, I wanted to start by thinking about organ donation, which is perhaps what people are more familiar with. So the campaigns around organ donation until recently had been quite human-centric and very focused on this idea of having a strong call to action, even quite aggressive. So you've got on the left this campaign called Kill Jill, and she slowly fades into the background as you don't donate your organ, implying that she has in fact died. And on the right you have this NHS Blood Transport campaign, which is all about people's kind of regrets around not having donated organs because now they need an organ donated to them. So you can see they're quite violent in some ways in nature, but they're also very direct and this strong call to action. In 2020, we had a change in the law. I don't know if people are aware of this change in the law, but we changed in the UK as a system from an opt-in system to an opt-out system, which means in the past you had to carry around those organ donation cards, whereas now, if you don't opt out, you are automatically an organ donor. And they shifted the campaigning language as well. So they had this campaign called Pass It On, which I hope you can see behind me. And it talked about the change in the law, but it also is quite surreal. It's got this landscape of balloons. We've lost the person as the central figure of this. And it's become much more centric on the idea of the organs with a very soft call to action, because actually you don't need to do anything. And I think the challenging thing ethically around this is that most people don't know about it, and therefore the conversations that are meant to be happening among families, particularly of different cultures and religions and societies, are not necessarily happening. So I think that was really important in the campaigning landscape. There's also been some really interesting work around Snapchat and kind of filters and stuff around the NHS trying to get younger people to think about this. But again, it doesn't have a great deal of debate in it. It's kind of presenting the organs that are there, but I don't know how widely this is used or what exactly has been going on with this. There's not a lot of documentation online of what happened. So I couldn't find many campaigns that dealt with tissue donation for research and generally around research, but this Trailblazer campaign is one of those ones. And it's quite a nice piece, it's a performative piece. But I found it really interesting that they focused on this idea of everyday heroes and trailblazers, and the language was all very positive and very, it doesn't go deeper than that kind of surface level kind of debate around this idea. But it also takes the COVID pandemic into account, and I think that's a really strong starting point for this kind of research, is to think about what COVID has done for us as a society and in terms of the media landscape. So within our work, we wanted to really take COVID-19 as a starting point. And think about the things that have changed because of that. So for example, the role of scientific research in society and the value of being part of scientific research has been something that has really touched us all over this time. The development of the vaccine, we've seen things change, we've seen things develop. Scientists have become a really big part of the media landscape, including the first person getting the vaccine being televised everywhere. So this sets a really important context, and certainly the scientists that we worked with from the Human Cell Atlas felt like this would have a really strong impact and trust in scientists. The second one is we've had a really strong period of reflection on death, grief, bereavement, and illness. A lot of us have been touched by those things, and a lot of us have had conversations about those things or have experienced them through technology and online. And the third, which we felt was really important to add into this, is data security and privacy of body data have been highlighted, particularly through the contact tracing apps and the vaccine passports, where we haven't really had a choice. We've been told, if you care about people and if you're part of this health system, you need to contribute into this, without really having a lot of critical debate around what that means for privacy and for our relationship to our body data. So this is some of the work of the Human Cell Atlas. And as you can see, it literally is an atlas. It's this, each of those dots represents a person's tissue and a person's data that's been mapped together and formed into this 3D visualization. That's a visualization of the liver that you see there. And what it's allowed scientists to do is to query this data set and compare and develop new associations that they never would have done before. They compare this to the Human Genome Project, where this is an extension where they're mapping the human RNA. And for that, they need tissue in order to do that. I think for a lot of us, it'll be really familiar, though. It's a 3D visualization that we're familiar in patterns of networks of social media and those kind of correlations between data, and along with a lot of early kind of new media work. But I think it's really important to remember each dot is a person. Okay, so it's really important to bear in mind and to remember that tissue research started from a point of lack of consent. Henrietta Lacks was one of the first people whose cells were made into immortal cells and who were involved in the development of lots of innovations within healthcare. And she is a figure that has been immortalized through cell research, but through non-consensual cell research. So her cells were taken without her knowing. And a lot of the research today done with the Laxers and with her family was done without knowledge. And that's built a system where there has been a lot of improvements and development ethically in human tissue donation and development. But one of the scientists here is also reflecting on the fact that although consent practices have shifted, there's still openness around the ideas of consent, and there's still ethical questions at play here, particularly in systems where pharmaceutical companies have the funding and the money, and academic institutions have the trust with users. So when institutional agreements come after that, there's a lot of flux there, in a sense that, I've donated my cells and my tissue to a scientific institute, but actually there's this much broader landscape of funding and relationships to the pharmaceutical industries. It also brought in these ideas of the human and the non-human. As we said, the kind of dots on a map, human cells, human tissue, data. And this was a story from one of the scientists where he was talking about this relationship between burial and disposal, whereby if he takes a brain from a brain bank to work on, because he's a Parkinson's researcher, he actually needs to bury that brain. Whereas if he takes a chunk of tissue, it can be disposed. And I thought that this was a really interesting parallel between these two landscapes. So these are some of the relationships that we mapped out between the different elements. So kind of questioning both the scientists and the public participants around this idea of, is there a kind of care of the dead? Is there respect of the dead? How do we form rituals around these practices? And we built a series of these post-kits. I brought some here as well, if anyone wants to have a look at them in more detail, which were aiming to get to some of these questions in more detail. So questions like, what kind of different tissue would you be okay with donating? Is reproductive cells different to cells from a tumor? Most people would feel like a tumor's been extracted from their body and therefore it's rubbish and junk, and they're almost looking at the scientists like, why would you even ask me if I want this? Because it's not mine. But whereas when you start talking about someone's eyes or their reproductive system, there's a lot of emotional and kind of significance generated within that. And the same with the kind of little quotes in the Petri dish. So the Petri dish was trying to get people to think about science and scientific nature, and there's also some drawing prompts as well. So drawing together the kind of experiences of the public when dealing with this within the public workshops, and also the experiences of scientists where we did 45-minute in-depth interviews with them, correlating those together, we're building and underpinning this augmented reality artwork. And this is some of the documentation design that documents some of the practice as well in the workshops, obviously also with the names changed for protecting identity. So our conceptions of the human body have come a lot from some of the artists historically. So Andreas Velez is first published on the human body, the structure of the human body, and talked about anatomy and dissection. And there's been a lot of kind of visualization and visual landscape and material cultures around these kinds of topics that have been developed over time. And I thought it was really interesting to kind of shift that and to work with other artists, or to look at the work of other artists who have shifted that, and thinking how cellular bodies can offer a different gaze on mortality, humanness, and altruism. So thinking about that and looking at examples like Spirit Molecule, and you can look at that if you want to as well, and also palaces that people might be familiar with by Gina Kazaki, which works with milk teeth and asks children to donate their milk teeth as part of this installation and sculptural work. It's also important to think about that kind of in the non-humanness, that when body material is separated from the body, it becomes quite non-human. So in the idea of the milk teeth and bone and tissue as well. So coming to the augmented reality artwork, which you'll see in the gallery spaces around you, you need to kind of get the QR codes and snap them, and then you can see the work appearing. We worked with concepts of non-linear narrative, which were built through the engagement work with scientists and the public to build these augmented reality experiences that focus on 5 key areas that were from the thematic analysis of the work that we did with them. So the first one is care. This one is about trust, and the trust is very much focused on body data and data itself. Immortality, looking also to the case of Henrietta Lacks and what our immortality is in relation to cells. Consent, again, really complex questions of consent within this work. And future. So the spoken word vignettes were blended with atmospheric sonic compositions across the 5 conceptual and geographic markers. And they're created to be experienced individually or collectively and to spark debate, really importantly, around these topics. So extending from some of the campaigns we saw earlier. So you can take the work anywhere you want. If you pick it up online, I'll get to the website at the end. You can actually take it for walks in the forest. You can take it to the sea. You can see the work appearing wherever you want. You can see it in the gallery here. But yeah, I think this is some of the feedback, but I'm not going to go into that. You can read that if you want to in the paper as well. The only work that has a call to action really is number 5, the future, the last one. And it's a really soft call to action. So it's saying, only you can choose, as all others who have come before, donate yourself, invisible, in cells, in data, but something carries on into a distant future. So gentle, soft call to action, meaning to stimulate conversation and debate around this area. And I'm going to say thanks for listening to the whistle-stop tour of this project, which was 12 months of work across this project. I'm happy to answer any more questions. And the digital version of the work is on either digitaldeath.eu or the Body Data Space website. So please go check it out, especially if you're online and not here in person.
Brilliant, Stacey.